Yesterday, Ninja Theory put out a trailer along with a press release about their upcoming action hack and slash type game, Hellblade. This game is sort of like their traditional character action games, such as DMC Devil May Cry, uh, but with a slight twist. They informed everyone when they released a trailer which indicated the subject matter of the game, along with a press release that discussed that the development team has been consulting with mental health experts to discuss the topic of mental health as a character motivation and seems like a plot device within the plot of the game. Specifically, the character suffers from some type of depression where they have to fight, seems like literal demons or maybe metaphorical demons inside the female protagonist's head. This brought me to a point where I was talking on Facebook with some friends and really struck a chord with me. I think it's great that developers want to tackle issues such as this, but it drew me back to games that have succeeded in discussing nuance and subtlety, a sort of a rare feat in the gaming industry. The best examples for this sort of writing and execution have oddly been Gone Home and Spec Ops: The Line, a walking sort of adventure game and a first or third person shooter rather. One deals with sexuality and coming out to one's family and the troubles of growing up in America and Western culture as a gay teen, coming out and trying to live in a happy and accepting lifestyle, and the difficulties of that. That being said, on the other end of the spectrum was Spec Ops: The Line, which takes the tact of most military games where it views the combat from the soldier's perspective. There are increasingly games that take it from another perspective, which I'll discuss in a minute, but the twist here was that the action and the conclusion of the game put an emphasis on the human mental and psychological toll that armed conflict takes on not only those innocent of the combat, such as the bystanders, but more centrally to this story was the soldier, who was struggling with his actions and the grief from them. These subjects require a great deal of subtlety, not because the gaming populace is weak or mentally feeble or something along those lines, but the nuance required to discuss these topics that are so complex and diverse on a personal basis. Stories that engage with this plot material have the ability to be very deep, personally connected stories that have great gravitas and push the narrative potential of games into a new exciting area. Where I think games fail is sort of in the very nature of video games. As far as big, exciting console type games go, you have long development cycles, typically larger teams. There's really no middle-sized games anymore, so you're either a small independent project where you're able to talk about the other sides of these topics and be more nuanced, or you have a sort of larger team, higher stakes, with sort of data coming into the development side from the business angle saying these are the ideas, these are the art, these are the scenarios that will help you sell your games. And I don't fault developers for incorporating that, because after all, if you make a game that stays 100% true to your vision, ignoring all this data you're given by marketers, and your publisher gives you millions of dollars to make a game and you sell 50,000 copies, guess what? That studio no longer exists, so I get why that happens. But the fact is, through this rounds of refining through data, you tend to lose some of the uniqueness that can come from a personally written narrative that has nuance, that has subtlety to tackle topics. Um, in a different direction, you can see how rare it is that these sort of nuanced writings and gameplay perspectives succeed. Humor takes brevity, wit, takes creativity that is quite antithetical to the idea of a studio type development process. That's why when South Park The Stick of Truth was released, and it was funny, it was so weird because those who have spent an extended period of time criticizing games and looking at them realize that most comedy in games is bad. It's sometimes lazy, recycled, canned, and relying on existing tropes and memes through internet and gaming culture. What the South Park Stick of Truth was able to do is not only able to make fun of those tropes, but it was able to have genuine humor that separates itself from just gaming culture and just have funny things that were brought up. They were able to do that because there was nuance in the writing. And yes, part of that has to do with they had brilliant writers. Parker and Stone, who wrote that, who write South Park, are geniuses. That's why their play, The Book of Mormon, is awesome and definitely worth seeing. The other part is they were in a position to control their product even after Ubisoft bought the publishing rights from the now defunct THQ. Understanding that subtlety and nuance is needed to develop a game with a certain narrative tone that either delves in types of creative expression that have been difficult for the medium, such as comedy or serious social issues. It getting to a point where that's no longer a big stumbling block for games, it takes a bit of work because we're not even close to there yet. If you remember when Tomb Raider was being announced and marketed by Square Enix in, I want to say, 2012, there was criticism that, like, there's rape fetishization of Lara Croft because of how they were saying, oh, we want to make you care about her and feel like you have to protect her, so we put baby fat on her and beat her up. And in the E3 demo that unveiled it, it was basically like this guy like catching her and sort of putting his hand on her, and like she fights back and gets away. Now if you played the game, there was no rape, there was no real deep connotations that that was intent. But the fact that gaming hasn't been able to tackle themes like mental illness, racism, bigotry, deep impacts of war, violence against women and children, or really any touchy topic, let's call it, anytime a game brushes up against that topic, I get nervous because I, for one, know that games have failed time and again to broach these topics, and every time they screw it up, it gets mentioned on the mainstream news, and the times that they do great things like Gone Home or Spec Ops The Line, no one cares. Like, there was the, I guess, making fun of Activision for, in last year's Call of Duty, like, press X to mourn or something, and in Homefront by THQ, it was like, press X to hide in mass grave. It's all these ham-fisted ways to bring out emotion of the player. And existing mediums like film or books, they've been given time to mature, and that's all it really is. Gaming's not incapable of taking greater narrative steps, but at the point we are in the chronology of the development of this medium, if you put that alongside the starting point of film, we are in the 1920s and 30s, where the biggest film and the biggest breakthrough in the cinematic medium was The Birth of a Nation, a movie that gave a second rise to the Ku Klux Klan and romanticized the nature of the Southern protectors of the Ku Klux Klan. That's where we are. So obviously we have tons of time and space to grow. But as someone who deeply loves gaming, has grown up alongside it, and has transitioned into academic life and academic criticism of mainly historical topics, but also literature, I find that gaming is in a position where you can tackle these topics, such as the impact on civilian life of wars. If you've played the PC game This War of Mine, it documents the survival process in a long-term military siege of a civilian city. That is an experience that no other medium can give you. No one can truly understand the siege of Sarajevo, the longest continual siege of a civilian city in human history. No one can understand the hell that those innocent bystanders went through. The women and children that were raped and murdered, the kids that were bombed to death, and the men that were executed in the streets. No one will understand that, but giving players agency in the simulation of a similar experience gives people a touchstone to have empathy for this situation on a much deeper level. And experiences like that are special. Now, this may not be super narrative based, but that gives you context for things. And I think those are interesting experiences that should be taken further. Because of long development cycles, sometimes nuance and subtlety is hard to do because of sometimes it's in there originally, and as time goes along you take it out because it's not engaging. But you can put in gameplay systems that are the crux of a game, that entertainment is built on top, that create meaning and experiences that are worth having. I think that's a huge step forward for games, and as we go forward into an era where people who grew up with games are entering academia, such as myself, and are able to write in academic journals seriously about games, I think we must move to a point where is it fun is often an irrelevant question, and I would argue we have started to get to that point. I wrote in my undergrad a final paper about The Last of Us and Bioshock Infinite, and I wrote about how often in games criticism there has been the question, well, is it fun? And I wrote how, for me personally, many will disagree with this, but were those games fun for me? No. I did not have fun in the traditional manner, but they were astounding games. I played them because the experiences were outstanding. Like for Bioshock Infinite, the social issues broached and the narrative discussed and the science fiction angles of it and the alternative realities that are discussed in it were outstanding. Something that I thought would take a lot longer for games to get to, and obviously the story of The Last of Us is outstanding. The characters are amazingly well developed, and I'm not going to spoil the narrative in that game. All I'm going to say is that game is a feat, and it's worth analyzing. So are so many other games. So I just think that the initial reaction by many in the gaming press to say, oh, this is awesome that they're talking about mental illness, I would urge you to wait. Because for me, it's not enough to talk about these topics. They must be executed on through systems, and as well as narrative abilities through in-game discussions and cutscenes as well. I think that we should hold gaming to a standard similar to film or books because it's worth it. To me, there's no more engaging experience than a video game. I love books. I have a bookshelf full of hundreds of books, but I prefer to play games because those experiences hit deeper for me. And I would love to be able to sit down and have an academic job where my job is to apply the lens of literary criticism to video games because they deserve it. I'd like to know what you think about the idea of incorporating these types of deep and touchy themes into video games, and what some examples of the best execution on these topics that require some form of nuance or subtlety are. Just let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to talk about them. I'm going to be writing a piece on my Tumblr about this, and I'll tweet that out when it's done. Hopefully it'll be a lot longer, more well organized, and more well researched. And thank you for stopping by.